Petra glanced nervously at Ilian, who gave her back a wink that was strangely reassuring. Beside her, Eric, their tall, red-bearded friend, stood tall and unflinching, with a green poncho made out of several different stitched-together fabrics concealing a host of weapons. Ilian looked back at their problem, or rather, the man that was the problem. Standing under the rim of a dim light of a hanging light bulb that made your vision go white for several minutes if you stared at it, was a man clad in a dark trench coat, flanked by two others wearing similar attire, brandishing dangerous-looking weapons. They were standing in an abandoned warehouse at the edge of a city infected with criminals and corruption. The walls were lined with crates, all the same homogeneous brown color. The crates in question were all but indistinguishable from one another, save for the string of numbers and letters in red ink imprinted on them. The scene was very tense. Petra was nervously rubbing her hands together and stealing glances at Ilian, who was smiling in a friendly, reassuringly confident manner, but was shaking on the inside. Eric was staring off into the distance, on an entirely different planet than theirs. Through the scope of her rifle, Renee saw all these things. She was dark-skinned and had frizzy, shoulder-length black hair that was held back by a blue bandana. Perched behind one of the hundreds of crates in the warehouse, her scope was centered on the man in black, who had one hand crossed and the other hand stroking a thin beard that ringed the outline of his face. "This isn't going very well," thought Renee, as she pondered whether to pull the trigger and just end this whole ordeal. A few hours ago, she recalled, Ilian had agreed to meet Drell Hashan, the leader of a powerful pirate fleet stopping by in this system, who had many other syndicate links to other systems. Ilian was prepared to make a deal with him, and after a few words were exchanged, it soon became clear that Hashan was at a point where things could go south very quickly, and even the slightest thing could set Hashan off, who was known for a short temper and with violent outbursts. Renee had noticed before that there were several other darkly clad figures awaiting in the darkness. If it came to a fight, they would be severely outmatched, even with Renee's skills. She couldn't hope to take them all down in time to save her friends. She breathed out a heavy breath. It had been several minutes since Ilian had presented their final offer, and the situation grew more and more uneasy as the time clocked by. Ilian and Petra exchanged glances, while Eric started to break out of his trance of boredom. Ilian looked at Eric and mouthed, "No," to him, but Eric either didn't notice or didn't care, because at that moment he lost it. "Damn it, Drill! How many bloody hours is this gonna take?" he yelled out angrily. Petra looked at Eric with a wide-eyed look that said, "Now you've done it." Ilian broke out first. "What my terribly mad and outrageous friend is trying to say," began, but was cut off. "Silence!" Drell screamed as he made a swiping motion with his hands. Instantly, his two guards raised their weapons, and several more jumped out from behind crates and through the door behind Hashan. Eric threw off his poncho and revealed several unfriendly-looking weapons, and drew two axes and yelled curses. Ilian drew his fusion gun from his holster and aimed at Hashan. Petra took out her sword and raised it with one hand, while with the other, holstered a rifle, a revolver. The two sides froze. Ilian aimed at Hashan, with a stern look on his face. Eric was swinging axes round and psyching himself up for a fight. Petra was eyeing their position. There are too many of them to fight. Renee watched the situation unfold below her. She focused her sights on Hashan, lining up his head. She paused when she saw the others do the same, and a tense standoff ensued. Renee bit her lip, and thoughts raced through her head. What could she do? Hashan walked over to Ilian, raising both hands above his head. Ilian had his rifle trained on him, smiling. Hashan walked over slowly to him, then stared down the barrel of Ilian's gun with one eye, and Ilian kept it trained on him, confused. Petra scanned the room, looking for something, anything, that could even the odds in this fight, or get them out of this mess. Eric was ready for a fight. His crazy eyes were brimming, breaking his strange death-defying stare down Ilian's rifle. Hashan suddenly broke out laughing. Ilian forced himself to laugh as well, and silently urged on the others to follow. Petra looked around awkwardly as she laughed along, and nothing in particular with the rest of them. Eric let out a deep laugh and pointed at one of Hassan's goons, who looked back, confused. The warehouse now echoed with laughter, though most of the laughs were not genuine. Renee looked on, astounded at what was happening. Hashan looked back up at Ilian, then spoke. "My friend," he said, smiling. "I like you. Wouldn't want you to end up like the last people who failed me, no?" he asked, pointing to a necklace that hung around his neck, that was composed of human teeth and fingers. Petra looked away, disgusted. Eric frowned. Ilian, keeping his cool, replied, "No, of course not." He made a pint of chuckling afterwards. Hashan was silent, and Ilian stopped. 12 days, Hassan said, then made a sweeping motion with his hands. A few of his goons groaned as they carried one of the crates over. They dropped it at their feet, then went back to surround them. Ilian made a point of holstering his weapon, and the others took his cue. Petra was quick to sheathe her sword and sling it across her back. Eric seemed almost sad that they weren't going to have a fight, and put away his axes sourly. "A pleasure doing business with you," Ilian said, smiling as he clasped his hands together. Hashan looked back up, then took something out from his trench coat. "The coordinates," he said, as he threw a dotted drive back to Ilian. Ilian caught it in his pocket. 12 days, Hashan said. With that, he made a sweeping motion with his arm and yelled at his goons. They all cleared out the back door, grumbling and bumping into each other. Then, as quickly as the whole situation had started, it ended. As the doors shut, Ilian heaved a sigh of relief. Petra closed her eyes and muttered something, and then turned to Ilian. "That was close. Way too close, Ilian," she said. "Curse that craven-clad brain codepace," Eric cursed out. "The next time I see that bastard, I'll smash his head in." Ilian nodded. "Not the nicest chap, I agree." "Or the most sane. He's downright crazy," Petra said. Ilian looked up. "You can come out now, Renee," he called out. Renee had already packed up all her gear and put on her long black jacket. She slung her rifle over her shoulder and made her way skillfully down the towers of the boxes overhead. She jumped down the last one and landed expertly on the ground, despite being weighed down by her backpack and rifle. "We should get moving," she said. "The militia will be here at any minute now." Not even Eric argued with that, and they made their way to the door opposite the one that Hashan and his men had entered. Eric kicked it open. They went to pick up the crate. Eric held one end, while Petra and Ilian held the other. Renee walked ahead to scout. Once they had gotten the crate out the door, they felt the faint drops of rain pelt their skin as the grey skies overhead rumbled and churned. The area outside of the workhouse was a field of tall grass, which ended to the right of the edge of a forest, and to the left at the edge of a valley of a gravelly road. The four awkwardly carried the crate to the road, where Renee was waiting for them. A wind had picked up, and Renee's long jacket billowed with it. She was staring across the fields beyond the road, which seemed to go on for miles. The road, if you could even call it that, stretched on for a while, till it reached the edge of the city, where tall buildings and structures stood. Eric dropped the crate on the roadside, and Petra joined him. Petra and Ilian cursed as they set their side down. Shaking his arms, Ilian sat down in the crate. Petra joined him. Eric tried to, but the whole thing threatened to collapse when he did. Renee just stared off into the fields. "Get Carl over here," Ilian said. "And fast." "On it," Petra said, as she typed into a comms device. "Carl, get over here," she spoke into it. A few minutes later, a dark green jeep pulled up beside them. A figure wearing grey pants and a dirty-looking, smudged blue shirt with a llama on it, covered by a dark grey jacket, jumped out and came bounding towards them. "How'd it go, Illy?" he asked. Ilian rolled his eyes. "You know I hate it when you call me that." Petra and Eric snickered. Renee turned around and a smile began to form. Ilian looked around at the others, then back at Carl, his little brother. He ruffled his messy hair and patted him on the back. Carl looked around at the others. "So, did you get the deal?" Carl said excitedly. "We got the deal, all right," Eric broke in. "Barely," Petra added. "That bastard had better watch his back anyways," Ilian interrupted. "We should get going." He paused. He was looking down the road, squinting his eyes. "Get the crate on the jeep," Ilian cried out. Eric heaved his side up as the others helped as best they could. Renee dove at the ground beside them and set up her rifle. Through her scope she saw 3 trucks approaching in an armored car. "We've got company," she said. "Can't you get that thing in any faster?" "Trying," Ilian and Petra said through strained breaths. Renee looked back through her scope. They were coming too fast. They needed more time. Renee closed her eyes, then adjusted her grip on the rifle. She opened her eyes again and set her crosshairs on the driver of the truck. No, she thought. These people aren't criminals. She lowered her aim to the tires, took a deep breath, and fired. The sound of the shot rang out through the field. Her bullet went zipping straight through the tires of the lead armored car. It began to drive in a violent zigzag before finally tipping over on its side, blocking the road. Its occupants ran out just in time before the car set ablaze. The convoy halted, and dozens of armed militia jumped out the backs of the trucks. Renee stood up and slung her rifle across her back. "Are you done yet?" she asked. Eric pushed with all his might, and the crate came thundering down on the bed of the Jeep. Carl was at the wheel. "Take your time," he yelled. "We've got all day." Ilian ran around and jumped into the shotgun seat. Petra piled into the back seat, and Renee and Eric were following closely behind. Suddenly a shot rang out, and Eric yelled out. He jerked to the left, crashing into the Jeep's side. Blood was running down his shoulder as he cried out curses upon curses to the militiamen. He suddenly was wild with rage and began to collect himself, and took out his axe as he turned to face them. "Eric, no!" Ilian cried out, opening the door and running out. Petra saw this too and followed. "Oh yeah, take some more time," Carl yelled. "It's not like we're being chased by gun-toting hooligans or anything." Renee turned and set her sights down her rifle instantly, but hesitated when she saw where the shots had come from. A younger boy, scarcely older than she was, holding a semi-automatic rifle and a scared look on his face. "No," she said. "No, I can't." Eric was now running at the militia, raging and crying out at them. Ilian and Petra ran after him. "Eric!" they both yelled, but he was in a mad frenzy. The boy who had fired his shot turned and started to run when he saw Eric charging. The rest of the militiamen paused where they stood, frozen by this strange, suicidal charge. But this freeze would not last so long. Ilian looked at Petra, and Petra nodded grimly. Quickly yet solemnly, he pulled out his rifle and stopped. He paused before aiming at Eric. Wincing, he set his scope on Eric's legs and placed his hand on the trigger. There was no guarantee he would even hit him. A shot rang out, but it wasn't Ilian's. Eric collapsed to the ground, crying out. Lying on the ground, Eric was now cursing wildly. Ilian looked behind him. Renee nodded. "Tracer," she said over to them, which meant the shots he fired was just a tracer round. Ilian and Petra let out a volley of shots that weren't aimed at anything in particular, but suppressed the remaining militiamen. "Get him out of here!" Ilian yelled out. A volley of shots erupted from behind the militiamen's trucks, but they were too far away to hit anything, and even if they were close, they were untrained, so would still have a hard chance of hitting them. The shot that hit Eric was a lucky one. Dragging the screaming, cursing, and flailing Eric, Ilian and Petra made it back to the Jeep and shoved him inside. Renee was firing while backing up, but she couldn't hit anyone. "These people haven't done anything wrong," she kept telling herself. She could have killed the lot of them, but she had more morals. She wasn't a Bengal anymore, and no one would force her to take any more innocent lives. "For the love of Michael," Carl cried out, losing his patience. "Get in, or we're leaving." Renee ran swiftly over and took her place in the stuffed Jeep. "Step on it," Ilian yelled. "About time, Illy," Carl said with a grin. Ilian put his head in his palm. Petra laughed, and Renee seemed to be smiling, but was looking out the window, so they couldn't tell. The Jeep sped forwards down the gravelly road, kicking back dirt and pebbles as it sped away from the rain and bullets that churned up the road behind them. The rain had now become a full-on storm, silently illuminated the sky, followed by claps of thunder. The rain came down in sheets, pattering on the little Jeep. Except for the remarks between Ilian and Ratchet, the snickers from Petra, and the strange, otherworldly string of silent curses whispered from Eric's bearded mouth, the journey back was silent, each one of them reflecting on the last words they had heard. 12 days.